Thank you for listening to the Chronicles of Christendom, a survey of medieval literature, by me, Mom Chilo. This podcast is dedicated to bringing light to medieval stories and viewing them from a traditional Christian perspective. I hope you enjoy this episode. In this episode, I want to complete the story of Perceval and the story of the Grail by Chretien de Troyes. Please go listen to the first two episodes if you haven't already. I give some background information in the first episode, and we're just going to continue where we left off in the second part. So, in the last episode, we finished talking about Perceval. We're no longer going to hear any more about Perceval, and the rest of the story is just going to focus on Gawain. Although we are promised in the story that we will hear more of Perceval, because the story, as I've said a few times now, is an unfinished story. It kind of cuts off in the middle of dialogue. Unfortunately, we never actually circle back to Perceval. So the story picks up right where we left off, where Gawain was at the tower where the mob tried to kill him. If you remember, Gawain tried to defend himself from the accusation of treason and killing somebody's father. But instead of fighting, they agree that Gawain will go and search for the lance that bleeds for 1 year, and if he doesn't find it, he'll come back and then he'll be absolved of his oath. The oath was strange in several ways, and it kind of seemed like he was sent on a fool's errand, but then the way that he couched the oath, that Gawain kind of altered the oath, was that if he doesn't complete it, then as long as he comes back, he can be absolved of his oath, as long as he, gives it his best college try, I guess. So as Gawain's leaving the tower, after some time, he encounters a maiden lamenting over a severely wounded knight. And this knight warns Gawain that no knight has ever crossed the fields of Galloway, so this would be like southwest Scotland, and returned except for him. And and Gawain has seen how this guy returning has come back all wounded. Nonetheless, Gawain takes the challenge, and he says that he will go and then come back, and if he comes back and the knight is dead, then he will take care of the maiden who's with him. And as he is crossing the field, Gawain encounters this very bratty damsel. She's actually called a haughty damsel, and the reason why this is significant is because there's a parallel here from an earlier part in the Perceval story. So after Perceval left the Grail castle, he encountered his cousin, who kind of tells him some lore about himself and about the Grail castle and the Fisher King. And if you remember, when Perceval encountered her, she was lamenting over a dead knight that was in her arms. And then, shortly after their talk, Perceval finds the person who killed that knight, her lover, and that knight was also called Haughty. He was called the Haughty Knight, just as this damsel is called the Haughty Damsel. So again, as I've pointed out a few times, there's some gender reversal that happens in some of these Perceval and Gawain parallels. And we're going to see a lot more of it, so just be ready. So this maiden, who's staring at herself in a mirror, says to Gawain as he's riding, slow down, sir, go easy. You're riding too recklessly. You shouldn't hurry so and quicken your horse's pace. Only a fool rushes up for no reason." "Maiden," said my lord Gawain, "may you be blessed by God. Tell me now, dear friend, what you were thinking when you without reason cautioned me to slow down." "I do have one, I swear, Sir Knight, for I know just what you are thinking." "What then?" he asked. "You want to grab me and carry me down this hill across your horse's neck." "That's right, damsel." "I knew it well," said she. "Cursed be any man who thinks that. Be careful never to try to put me on your horse. I am not one of those silly girls the knights sport with and carry away on their horses when they go out seeking adventure. You'll never carry me on your horse. However, if you dared, you could take me with you, if you are willing to take the trouble and catch me in my palfrey from this garden plot. I'll go along with you until you encounter in my company misfortune and grief and trials and shame and woe." So this damsel says, if you can fetch me my horse from the garden, then I will follow you around loyally. However, I'm just going to be there to laugh at your misfortune and grief. And Gawain says, yeah, that sounds like a good idea. So he goes into this garden on foot because there's like a bridge that horses can't cross to get to it. So he goes on foot to get the girl's horse. And there's this a guy who's described as a huge knight who's there with the horse. And he says that Gawain can just have the horse, but that he's going to regret it. Gawain ignores him, and then he's able to get the horse back. And the horse, it is said, is it's used to walking this kind of narrow bridge. So then the damsel and Gawain go back to the injured knight with his maiden. And on the way, Gawain picks up some herbs. And it is said that Gawain is actually quite a good medicine man. Like, he knows how to pick out herbs and apply them to people. He kind of has this skill of healing. And he goes back to the injured knight and he applies the herbs. And then as soon as the injured knight is resuscitated or he's back on his feet, he steals Gawain's horse and then he reveals who he is. He tells Gawain, "Don't you recall the night you tormented so and forced against his will to eat for a month with the hounds, his hands tied behind his back? Know that you acted foolishly, for now it will bring you disgrace. Then are you Grail, who took the damsel by force and did with her what you would? Yet you knew perfectly well that maidens are protected in King Arthur's land. The king has given them safe conduct and watches over and protects them. No, I don't think and refuse to believe that this is why you hate me and seek to do me ill, for I acted in accord with the law that is established and set throughout the kingdom." And then he rides away with his maiden, and Gawain is just kind of left there, and the only horse that's available is this scrawny nag, this little horse that's not really suitable for a knight or even combat really. And the haughty maiden, also called the spiteful maiden, is there, and she's just laughing at Gawain having to ride that ridiculous horse. Gawain can't even get the horse to run, so he just walks with it until he encounters this river that has a castle on the other side. And there's no bridge, and the only way to cross the river is by boat. And as he's approaching the river, he sees that there's someone riding after him, and we later learn that the person riding after him is Grail, nephew, who was sent to kill Gawain. So Gawain fights him, and he beats him despite his stupid little horse that he has, and then he takes his war horse, so now he has a real horse. But in the meantime, he's lost track of the maiden. And then the boatman, the person who ferries people back and forth on the river, he says that he always gets to keep all the horses won by knights, and that Gawain has to give up the horse that he just won. And then he starts to shame Gawain when he refuses, and he points out that there's all the damsels and maidens in the castle who are looking at him and will be making fun of him. And Gawain's like, okay, I don't want that, because remember, Gawain is very much motivated by the ladies. And then the boatman offers him an alternative, and he says, "Gawain, look, if you bring me back his person, then you'll get to keep his horse." So Gawain is fine with that, so he brings him back as a prisoner to the boatman. And then the boatman warns Gawain of the maiden that he was with, who has now seemed to have run off. He says, "Sir, don't concern yourself with the maiden or where she went, for she's not a maiden. She's worse than Satan, for she has had many a knight's heads chopped off at this port. But if you'll heed my advice, you'll come to my house this day and accept such lodgings as I can provide. It would not be to your advantage to linger upon this shore, for this is a wild land full of great wonders." And you should be making some connections here between this boatman and the fisherman. I don't think that they're connected in any particular way, other than to indicate that something magical is about to happen. So in both cases, there's these people on boats who offer lodging to the hero. And also interestingly is that they both happen after they kind of meet a love interest. So one happens after Perceval meets Blanchefleur and leaves her, and the other happens after Gawain meets the haughty maiden and the haughty maiden leads him. Whether or not the haughty maiden's a love interest with Gawain, it's a bit complicated, but we'll see as the story goes on. So Gawain and the boatman cross the other side. And this castle, as we'll see, is quite magical. And Gawain asks who the lord of the castle is, and the boatman says, "Sir, I don't know." "You don't know? That surprises me, because you told me you are in service of the castle and are well paid for it, yet you don't know who is the lord of it? "I can truthfully tell you," he said, "that I don't know now and never have." "Dear host, then tell me now, who defends and guards the castle?" "Sir, it is well guarded by 500 longbows and crossbows, which are always drawn and ready. They are so ingeniously set up that if anyone were to attack, they would shoot indefinitely and never be exhausted. I'll tell you this much about the situation. There is a queen, a lady, who is very noble, rich, and wise, and of the highest lineage. The queen, with all of her great treasures of gold and silver, came to dwell in this land, and she had the strong manor built that you see before you. And she brought with her a lady she loves so much that she calls her queen and daughter. And this second lady herself has a daughter, who is in no way a shame or disgrace to her lineage. I don't think there's a more beautiful or gifted princess under heaven. The hall is very well protected by magic and enchantment, as you'll soon learn if it pleases you to be told. So then he goes on to describe the magical hall. A learned astronomer, whom the queen brought with her, created such a great marvel in that palace upon the hill that you have not heard the equal of it. No knight can enter there or stop for any time at all or stay alive within it if he is filled with covetousness or has within himself any stain of pride or avarice. Cowards and traitors cannot endure, nor can perjurers or recreants. These all perish so quickly that they cannot live there even for a moment. Yet there are many squires within, who have come from many lands to serve here and win their arms. There are easily as many as 500, some with beards, others not, 100 without beards or mustache, another 100 with growing beards, and 100 who shave and trim their beards every week. There are 100 with hair whiter than lamb's wool, and 100 who are turning gray. And there are elderly ladies without husbands or lords, who have very wrongly been disinherited from lands and possessions after the deaths of their husbands. And there are orphan damsels abiding with the two queens, who treat them with very great respect. Such are the people who frequent the castle, and they are all awaiting an absurd, impossible event. They are waiting for a knight who will come there to protect them, to restore their inheritances to the ladies, to give husbands to the maidens, and to make squires knights. So unlike the Grail castle, which had the two men, it had the man served by the Grail, along with the Fisher King, unlike the two queens who are said to rule this castle. Now I want to read this scene about when Gawain and the boatmen are approaching the castle, and they meet an interesting figure. They at least see an interesting figure. So it says, they rode to the foot of the stairs in front of the great hall, where they found a peg-legged man sitting alone upon a pile of freshly cut grass. His artificial leg was of silver, finely inlaid with gold and striped with alternating bands of gold and precious stones. The hands of the peg-legged man were not idle, for he was holding a knife, with which he was busily whittling a branch of ash. The man did not address those who passed in front of him, nor did they say a word to him. The boatman drew my lord Gawain to him and asked, "Sir, what do you make of this peg-legged man?" "His artificial leg is not aspen wood, I swear," said my lord Gawain. "From what I see, it is quite beautiful." "In the name of God," said the boatman, "the peg-legged man is wealthy, with large and handsome properties. You would already have heard some news that would have been most distressing were I not accompanying you and serving as your escort." And this last line is kind of vague. It's not entirely clear what is meant by distressing news he would have heard, Gawain would have heard, if the boatman was not accompanying him. We never hear of this peg-legged man again, but Chretien did spend quite a few lines describing him, so I think it's worth asking what exactly, or why exactly is he described? And honestly, I'm personally at a loss. I think it's just one of those times where Chretien throws you something kind of weird and very symbolic, and I don't always have an answer, but it's one of those things that keeps me coming back to Chretien's stories. They finally enter the hall and they see the bed of marvels, and it's in this beautiful room, this beautiful hall. The bed is very beautiful, very expensive, very ornate. Chretien goes into quite some detail to describe the beauty and the ornamentation in this room. And the ferryman is trying to get Gawain to leave. He's like, look, we should turn back now. But as the story says, when the boatman saw he was unable to stop him, he said no more, but he could not bear to remain in the hall long enough to watch him, Gawain, sit upon the bed. So he went on his way, saying, "My lord, I am very distressed, and saddened you must die, for no knight has ever sat upon this bed and lived, because it is the bed of marvels, whereon no one sleeps or dozes or rests or sits, and then arises alive and well. It is a great pity that you will offer your life in pledge without hope of ransom or recovery, since neither affection nor argument can persuade you to leave this place. May God have mercy on your soul, for my heart could never bear it. were I to see you die." With that he departed from the great hall, and my lord Gawain sat upon the bed in his full armor, with his shield strapped over his shoulders. As he sat down, the cord screeched and all the bells rang, filling the whole hall with noise. All the windows flew open, and the wonders were revealed, and the enchantments appeared. For bolts and arrows flew in through the windows, and more than 500 struck my lord Gawain's shield, yet he did not know who had attacked him. The enchantment was such that no one could see from which direction the bolts came, nor the archers who shot them. And then so after all these arrows come at Gawain, then there's this like lion that appears, and Gawain kills the lion. After that, this curse that's over the castle seems to have been lifted. Something has changed in the castle. After killing the lion, he sat back down upon the bed, and his host returned to the hall with a beaming face, found him sitting on the bed, and said, "Sir, I assure you, you have nothing more to fear. Remove all your armor, because the marvels of the great hall have been forever stilled by your coming. You will be served and honored by young and old herein. May God be praised." He then meets the queen of the castle along with her granddaughter. So he meets the eldest woman and her granddaughter, but he does not yet meet the middle woman, the daughter of the grandmother. And when she meets Gawain and realizes that he's one of the knights of King Arthur's court and of his round table, the grandmother queen begins to ask a lot of questions about Arthur's court. However, I should note, because it's going to become relevant later, that she does not know who he is in particular, other than a knight from Arthur's inner circle. After one night spent in this castle, he looks out the window and he sees the spiteful maiden that had earlier left him with another man. And despite what everyone in the castle says, he goes out to see her, and he leaves without saying his name. And he even says, look, I'm leaving. He tells us to the elderly queen, he says, "Look, I'm leaving, and don't ask me what my name is." However, when I say he's leaving, he's not like he intends to come back. It's not like he's like leaving. So Gawain is still trying to impress this girl, that merciless maiden, the haughty maiden. And after Gawain defeats the man who was with her in battle, he then accepts a challenge posed on him by the maiden. The maiden says that if Gawain wants to impress her, he should take his horse and jump over this ford, it's like this ravine, that has like water at the bottom of it, and jump to the other side. And she says, "Look, don't worry, other people have done it before, it shouldn't be too big of a deal." So Gawain agrees, and then he tries to jump over the ford, but he actually falls in and he gets stuck in the water. And he has to climb out with his horse to get to the other side. And his horse is now completely exhausted. We're going to see another parallel to the Perceval part of the story here. So when Gawain gets to the other side, he meets this lone knight. And this knight was a former lover of the spiteful maiden, who he calls the haughty maiden of Logris. And once Gawain reveals that he has been to the magic castle and he's seen the bed of marvels and he passed the challenge, this lone knight, he's a bit suspicious. He doesn't believe him, and then eventually Gawain kind of tells these details that only someone who has passed the challenge and seen it himself could actually know. So he kind of acquiesces, and he says, "Sir, so help me God, I did not believe that near or far there was any knight who could win the honor that has come to you. Now tell me if you saw the white-haired queen, and whether you asked her who she is and where she's from." So after Perceval leaves the Grail castle, he meets some lady, his cousin, who says something very similar, at least the structure of it. Once Perceval says, "I was at the Fisher King's castle," his cousin is like, "Tell me, did you ask this, this, and that? And did you see this, this, and that?" And now we see a similar structure repeating itself here. So I'll continue. "I never thought to ask," Gawain says. And you'll notice that this is like Perceval's failure to ask about the Grail and the lance as well. "But," Gawain continues, "I did see her and speak to her. I shall tell you who he is," he said. "She's the mother of King Arthur. By the faith I owe God and his might, if I remember right, King Arthur hasn't had a mother for a long while. Not for a good 60 years, I believe, or more." So Gawain is very suspicious of this claim, but the other knight continues, "Yet it is true, sir, that she's his mother. When his father, Uther Pendragon, was laid to rest, it happened that Queen Igraine came into this land, bringing all her wealth, and upon this rock she had the castle built, and the splendid and beautiful hall I've heard you describe. And now that you saw the other queen, the grand and beautiful lady who was wife to King Lot and mother of the knight I'd like to see damned, mother of Gawain. So the elderly queen in the magic castle, that is Arthur's mom, and by extension that would be Gawain's grandmother, because Arthur and Gawain are uncle and nephew. And then we learn that the other queen is Gawain's mother. And Gawain is going to be very suspicious of this even more, because listen to what he says. I dare say that Gawain has not had a mother for at least these past 20 years. So Gawain is kind of talking in the third person here because he hasn't revealed that he is Gawain yet. Yet it is she, sir, I have no doubt. She followed her mother here and was heavy with child, bearing the very beautiful and noble damsel who is my sweetheart and the sister, I'll not hide it from you, of him who I'd like God to shame, for truly he'd no longer have his head if I had him within my grasp, as I have you now. I'd defeat him and cut it off at once. Even his sister couldn't stop me from ripping out his heart with my bare hands. I hate him so. We talked earlier about how in the Grail castle, or the fisherman's castle, how Perceval's dad and grandpa are kind of in the castle, because Perceval has this interesting family lineage that seems to be incestuous. But here in Gawain's story, in the magic castle that he encounters, it's his mom and his grandmother who are in the castle. So that's a sort of parallel that reverses the genders, which is a trend we've seen throughout the story. And as well as we just learned, Gawain's sister is also in the castle. So this night keeps going on, and he tells Gawain how Gawain has killed his father, and that he would kill Gawain if he could touch him. And then Gawain reveals himself eventually, and they set up a time to fight soon at Arthur's court, which is said to be nearby somewhere. And the other detail that I want to point out with regards to the Perceval parallels is that when Perceval is leaving the Grail castle, when he's crossing the drawbridge, we're told this little detail about how when he's leaving it, the drawbridge starts coming up before Perceval has fully left it on his horse, so the horse has to make a jump in order to cross it. In the same way that Gawain has to make a jump over the ford before he gets more lore about the magical castle that he was staying at. But going back to Gawain, so after he's done talking with this knight and he sets up a fight, I shall say that this is another fight that he has set up due to allegedly killing somebody's father. Anyways, Gawain jumps back over the ford, and he actually makes the jump this time. And he sees the evil maiden. And when he encounters her again, she actually has a sort of repentance that she does. So she says that, she repents of being evil, and that the reason why she was acting the way she was is because the death of her first love caused her to be this way. And that she was essentially trying to kill herself at one point. And it's interesting, going back to Perceval, when Perceval meets his cousin who was lamenting her lover's death, she also tried to kill herself, or at least she wished for death upon herself. And Gawain goes back into the castle with all the maidens who are his family, as we've just learned, and he still doesn't reveal himself to his own family. It's not clear why. Perhaps he doesn't believe it, right? Because if the one queen was his mother, you would think that Gawain would know what his mother looks like. It says that his mother has been dead for 20 years, or at least that's what he claims. So if you assume that Gawain is at least like 30 or something, which I think is a reasonable estimate, then he would at least have at least some recognition of what his mother looked like, unless she allegedly died of childbirth, or maybe he didn't know his mother that well for whatever reason. Gawain then sends a messenger to Arthur's court, which is nearby, to explain to Arthur in the court about the duel that Gawain has to do in Arthur's court over allegedly killing somebody's father. And then he knights all of the squires in the castle who previously had no knight who is able to knight them. And he knights 500 squires, we're told. And this is what we're told of the messenger that Gawain sent. Thus, throughout the city, the poor people lamented the loss of my lord Gawain, whom they all loved dearly. The squire passed through the crowds and rode on until he found the king, King Arthur, seated in his palace, with 100 counts palatine, 100 dukes, and 100 kings seated around him. Arthur was sad and downcast to see all his many barons and no sign of his nephew. He fainted in his great distress. The first to reach him was certainly not slow, since they all rushed to help. My lady Lore, who was seated on a balcony, heard the lamentation throughout the hall. She came down from the balcony, overcome with emotion, and went straight to the queen. When the queen saw her, she asked her what was the matter. And then that's just how the story ends. There's nothing more to Chretien's story. That's the ending. Very abrupt, as we've seen. You know, we're very much in the middle of a scene, and there's a lot of plot points that have still yet to be resolved. And Chretien is not such an amateur as to not resolve his plot points. None of his other stories are like that. So just to go through the plot points that are unresolved, or at least some of them. So Perceval needs to reunite with Blanchefleur because he promised his lover, his lady, that he will reunite with her, and he has yet to do so. And then something has to happen with the sword that he was given by the Fisher King, because a lot of lines were wasted on describing the sword by a couple different characters, and nothing has come of it. Then there's the question of the Grail and the Bleeding Lance. And even if you believe, like I do, that Perceval did find the Grail and perhaps the Bleeding Lance as well, there still needs to be some sort of resolution. Something needs to change in the universe, in the world, like the sort of post-apocalyptic vibes that we get of the story of the Kingdom of Logres need to start reversing in some manner now if Perceval has completed his quest. And then Gawain has a couple of unresolved plot points as well. So Gawain was initially going to go on a quest to rescue a woman who was being besieged, and then he would be able to gird on the sword with the strange straps. So again, we hear nothing again about that. But before he's able to go on that quest, he gets interrupted, and he has to clear his name from treason. And then during his attempt to clear his name from treason, he swears like the Lance Oath, if you remember that. And then he finds this magical castle, and he now has to defend himself at Arthur's court. So we need to have some resolution about the magical castle and what happens at Arthur's court. But none of that gets resolved. There is quite a lot of continuations that people in the medieval period did of this story. And there seems to be a couple independently created continuations as well. So several people, unaware of other continuations, made their own continuations of this story. Because again, it's unfinished, but it's very well written, and it was very popular as well. So that's the story of Perceval. And maybe later I'll go through some of the continuations that were created from Chretien. Although I don't like them as much, I think that in some sense they misunderstand what Chretien was trying to do, and they're, I think, just objectively not as well written. I think that's pretty commonly agreed. They're not as well written as Chretien's are. Anyways, that's all. I'll see you next time. Thank you.